Really good to be here. I'm really excited. My name is Steven Casper, but most people call me Cass, and you can usually find me at MIT. I'm excited to be here today. I am fortunate to work on a lot of interesting things, one of which is RLHF. We'll talk more about what that is pretty soon. And also thanks to a lot of co-authors listed here at the bottom. So I think kind of my goal today, or like the role that this talk is going to kind of play in the broader programming, is to kind of get everyone some common background and people up to speed on kind of the algorithmic state of the art behind training advanced aligned AI systems. And I think I'm going to do that today with a talk that is very largely, in one sense, focused on kind of like pure science, if there is such a thing. But also I'm going to be doing some editorializing, so see this for what it is. And my overall goal is to kind of talk about the, not just this technical state of the art, but also the algorithmic story behind like how we got to where we currently are with how we train AI systems in the state of the art, right? And right before I begin, just maybe for my sake, just because I'm interested, if not for no other reason, who here like has a lot of interest in like technical AI safety and AI alignment topics, right? And who here who would say that they have a lot of interest in like technical AI governance or just regular AI governance topics? All right, cool. I think there's going to be some stuff in here for everyone. Hope it'll be interesting. But like I said, I want to talk about the algorithmic story behind where we are. And I want to start off that story by actually talking about a paper that was published in October of last year. And this is where a lot of academic types, Yoshua Bengio was the first author, who are very kind of concerned about AI risks, got together, and they put together this paper called Managing AI Risks in an Era of Rapid Progress. And I think it's a really great reference. If you haven't looked at it before, maybe like note down the title, you can check it out. I think it does a good job of laying out risks and like a reasonable case for caution involving them. But I just want to point out one part of this paper, which I thought was like very disarming, and that was just the first sentence, right? It was this nice reminder that in 2019, GPT-2 could not reliably count to 10, right? And you can go like to Hugging Face and check that this is indeed the case with GPT-2. If you regenerate enough times, you'll probably find some mistakes depending on how you prompt it. And I think this kind of goes to show that like 5 years ago might seem like a lot longer of a time ago to most of us than it actually was, at least when we're kind of thinking about AI, because it moves really quickly. Right? Even a year and a half ago seems like a very, very long time ago when you think about the state of the art of advanced AI systems in like October, November of 2022. This was right before like ChatGPT came about. So remember what it was like right before ChatGPT existed, right? The state of the art in AI, the modern AI regime of advanced services was not these like interactive chatbots that could do a lot of tasks very dynamically, very helpfully. It was just a bunch of like plain old boring base text models that you could do a lot of tricks with, but like there certainly was a pretty big qualitative difference in like what types of AI services were available, right? So think back 5 years ago, think back a year and a half ago, we've really been making a lot of progress very quickly. And I also want to point out another thing from about a year ago, or a little over a year ago. This is actually kind of old news at this point, but there was a piece put out by folks at Microsoft AI where they were studying GPT-4 using early access to GPT-4, which made them speculate or kind of describe what they'd looked into as seeing maybe potential, possibly signs of sparks of artificial general intelligence with GPT-4. They remarked, given the breadth and depth of its capabilities, we believe that it could reasonably be viewed as an early, yet still incomplete version of an artificial general intelligence / AGI system. Maybe one of the most notable things about this particular like example or this particular slide here is that this paper, I believe, came from May of 2023. Right? So it's been about a little over a year and a half since we kind of got into the chatbot dynasty. It's been over a year since we've had GPT-4. And there have been some like very important and like notable advancements in the state of the art in advanced AI, right? Don't get me wrong. But we haven't had a massive like qualitative leap in what type of services are available from AI systems, which might suggest that like there might be a little bit more on the horizon soon. We might be poised for yet another like kind of qualitative leap forward in what's happening. It's probably going to involve stuff like highly agentic AI systems that are able to accomplish long horizon tasks, but I digress. The point is that we're at a really interesting point in time in which we're in this current regime where chatbots are kind of in charge. They're the modern dynasty of AI services. And we don't exactly know what's next, but we think it might be kind of big. And I think for that reason, it's kind of good to look at the algorithmic story behind what got us here as a way of kind of understanding like where we are in AI history and what might come next. And that's my goal today. So what is this RLHF thing, right? Raise your hand if you like know what RLHF stands for. Okay, perfect. We're going to go fast then. So RLHF stands for Reinforcement Learning from Human Feedback, and it's a set of really simple, interconnected algorithmic processes, right? There are just 3 of them. I'm sure you, like almost all of you know this pretty well at this point. So you start with some kind of like policy, or some sort of action selecting AI system. And you will initialize it after pre-training or initialize it randomly or whatever. But you have this action selector and you sample a bunch of actions from it. Do I have a laser pointer? Yes. So that's where That's where you're going to sample a bunch of actions. This is known in AI as creating a data set, right? And then you're going to collect human feedback on that data set. This is known in AI as annotation of data, right? Where you'll ask humans what they think of these individual examples or pairs of examples or whatever, and they'll give some metadata for you. They will give you some information about like how valuable or preferable they think these examples are. The next thing that you will do is train a reward model on the human labels or the human metadata. In AI and machine learning, this is just called kind of fitting a model, right? Where you're going to train this reward model, we'll call it a reward model, in order to be a proxy for what humans think about an example, and then, or an action, or a set of actions. And then you'll use this reward model finally to update the policy using reinforcement learning. And reinforcement learning is just kind of one of the main ways in the AI, field of AI that systems are trained, right? And every single reinforcement learning algorithm can be understood as some sort of formalized process of trial and error. And that's it, right? Then you can just repeat the process over and over again. You'll have an updated policy that is learned to behave more preferably from the reward model. You can collect more data, you can annotate more data, you can update your reward model, and you can train your policy, and so on and so on. And this is at the highest possible algorithmic level, like what gives us modern AI systems. And from now on, in like the rest of this presentation, oh, I'm going to take questions at the end, by the way. And I'm going to have like, I'm going to hang around for like the 20 minutes after this talk. Thanks. So, sorry, I forgot to mention that. So from now on, in this whole like presentation, whenever I say RLHF, I'm going to refer to this, but also like simple remixes of this process. Because there exists some. So one example is like intuitively appealing. Well, we have AI systems that can do a lot of things these days. Can they replace humans in this process? Yes, they can. If you take the human out and you put a prompted AI system into the loop, you will have something that is known as RL from AI feedback, or RLAIF, right? Another thing you might imagine doing is like, you know, this reward model, this middleman, is this really necessary? No, it's not super necessary in order to get something that works. If you get rid of the reward model and then you just update a policy directly using some sort of supervised or reinforcement learning algorithm on pairs or examples from, with human feedback annotating them, you'll have something known as direct preference optimization. And that's really popularly researched these days. Another remix on things is if you kind of get rid of the reinforcement learning, but you're still like using humans to give you feedback on data and you're updating a model. This is just very broadly describes something like supervised fine-tuning on curated data. So all of these things like have some of the same algorithmic components, or all have at least one or two of the key algorithmic components. So whenever I refer to RLHF, just know that I'm kind of referring to RLHF plus, if that makes sense, right? And as you might imagine, something with such simple algorithmic components has a very long history. This figure is taken from some acquaintances and a collaborator of mine in a different paper, where they kind of talked about the like academic heritage of lots of these ideas that kind of go into RLHF. And they argued that things go back to the 1600s, which, I mean, is hard to argue with because like those assumptions were kind of formalized back then. But I'll give a more brief like history of RLHF itself. I'm going to start mine in 1990. You know, back in the 90s, people were thinking a lot about these problems a lot. A pretty notable event was a research agenda for the 90s, which was published in 1990 in human-computer interaction. And if you go and look at this Lewis paper, I think it's kind of interesting, like just how relevant, or like at least how readable it is today, because it's thinking in terms of lots of the same problems as we're currently like handling today. Another thing is the Sutton and Bartow textbook on reinforcement learning. Have any of you used this textbook? Yeah, right. That's awesome. And the first edition came out in, I think, the late 90s, but I mean, I've used the third edition, right? It's still pretty relevant today. The field of reinforcement learning was kind of maturing quite a lot by the 90s. Fast forward to 2007 or 2008. The kind of arguable first like paper implementing like an RLHF approach to solving a problem came out. This algorithm was known as Tamer. And one thing that I find is kind of funny, and I don't know if like normal people would find it funny, is that, you know, this was so long ago in 2007/2008 that they didn't call the policy a policy, they just called it an action selector, which I don't know, like it makes me feel old even though I'm not. Sorry, no, it makes me feel young even though I am, but whatever. Anyway, also in the 2000s, there was like this Netflix challenge, which brought a lot of attention toward kind of methods for inferring human preferences. And by 2017, the field around these types of methods had like matured and coalesced enough such that there was a pretty good, pretty comprehensive survey paper that was put out. I've heard collaborators of mine refer to this as the Worth survey quite a lot. Fast forward to last year, and the main reason I'm here today is because I worked with a lot of collaborators on a paper called Open Problems and Fundamental Limitations of Reinforcement Learning from Human Feedback, in which we did our best possible job to kind of like sum up all of the challenges that the state of the art was facing, which I'm going to talk more about pretty soon. But many of you, maybe some of you, might be even thinking like, why didn't he talk about the thing? Didn't he miss something? Is he skipping something that happened in 2017? Yes, I am. There was one really kind of pivotal moment in the history of reinforcement learning from human feedback in 2017. Does anyone want to guess what it is? What I'm about to show on the next slide? What's that? Yeah, the Cristiano paper. Has anyone seen this paper before? Lots of you probably have. This is awesome. So this paper comes out in 2017. The first author is Paul Cristiano. Many of you may know he's a pretty intelligent guy. And this paper is called Deep Reinforcement Learning from Human Preferences, and it used a version of reinforcement learning from human feedback in order to train a little humanoid, or not really humanoid, it was like a leg, a little robot in a simulated physics environment to do backflips using only about 1,000 human labels, right? That looked like this. And behold, right? Like if you're not really impressed by this like backflipping hopper robot, it's because you're a human from like 2024. And you're way desensitized to like impressive AI things, right? But back in 2017, like this was the shit. Like everyone was going insane because someone finally had used reinforcement learning from human feedback to do something kind of moderately impressive, which no one had really managed to do up until this point, right? This was in 2017. Notice like who some of these people's names are, what some of their affiliations are. And knowing what you know today, you can probably speculate about kind of what happened in the following years involving reinforcement learning from human feedback, right? It didn't take people very long to figure out that they could use RLHF in order to mess with language models. And they did so to kind of great effect. I think the OpenAI paper on this, the first major one came out in like 2019. So what exactly is the approach that people have coalesced on with using RLHF to fine-tune language models? I'm just going to show a version, like a more detailed version of a figure from a few slides ago, right? We'll just with a few more details here. So when it comes to large language models, you're going to start off with a policy, right? And that policy is going to be a pre-trained language model. Think like GPT-3, right? This kind of thing, something that's just like learned a bunch of text from the internet. You're going to collect a bunch of examples of conversations in which this model is kind of like prompted or configured in order to like be able to participate in a conversation. And then in the human feedback step, all you're going to do is this really, really simple process of showing a human two versions of a conversation and asking them which was better, A or B, right? So the human is actually giving just like one bit of feedback at each iteration here. Then you'll use that binary preference feedback in order to train a reward model under the principle that the reward model should output a high reward estimate for examples that were marked as preferable and a lower reward estimate for examples that were marked as less preferable, right? In practice, this is kind of just done with a binary cross entropy loss. And then you'll use reinforcement learning to update the policy using the reward model. Usually today, this is done with proximal policy optimization, or PPO, which is just one particular reinforcement learning algorithm. And then you have your remixes on it, like RLHF and DPO. But this is in a little bit more detail, kind of like what exactly is going on when like the large language models, the most advanced AI systems that we have today are kind of like optimized. This is it. Right? If you didn't understand how modern AI systems were trained before, now you do. It's really just this interconnected set of these pretty simple algorithmic processes. And this has given us like these systems, right? So here we are at the state of the art. We have these kinds of things, and it all went really well, as we know. Just kidding, no, it didn't. So excuse me for kind of like doing the taboo thing and just like ripping an entire paragraph and putting it on a slide. But this is from our paper on open problems and fundamental limitations with reinforcement learning from human feedback. And there have just been a lot of challenges as these AI systems have cropped up. They have revealed sensitive private information. They've hallucinated lots of untrue content, spread biases that favor specific ideologies. They've exhibited sycophancy. They've expressed undesirable preferences, like not wanting to be shut down. They've been easy to misalign by fine-tuning on as few as 10 new examples. They've been vulnerable to adversarial attacks like jailbreaking or like prompt injection and extraction attacks. And all of these issues weren't just things that kind of like cropped up with GPT 3.5 and then got pretty quickly like patched when it came to GPT 4. The state of the art with attacks is alive and well. As tends to be the case with kind of adversarial or adversarialable research agendas in machine learning, there's this kind of arms race between people finding failures and using attacks to elicit problems from models, and then developers or the makers of the models kind of like implementing defenses as well. And one good example of like how the arms race is alive and well is like this paper, but there are many others, right? The Andrushenko et al. Paper kind of showed that if you kind of are willing to customize your approach to attacking different models differently, you can quite effectively take basically everything at the state of the art, at least at the time, and find a bunch of problems with them, right? Some people I've heard little whispers about people speculating that like circuit breaking or something is going to like make this stop the arms race or like be a win for defense with like AI systems, and they're not going to be like attackable anymore. We'll see, but history tells us almost certainly not. And we can expect the arms race to kind of continue, where there are lots more problems found, and hopefully we can continue to make progress on finding solutions with them. All right, so what's going on, right? Like we had these systems that were trained with reinforcement learning from human feedback, and there were a bunch of problems with them. And these were not like foreseen problems. There was a lot of effort put into making these happen by the developers. And I want to make 2 points here. And these 2 points kind of seem like they're in opposition, but I think they're really complementary actually. So the first point I want to make about like seeing all of these problems is that it's a really good thing. Like unambiguously, it's really nice that we've observed all of these challenges. And to understand kind of what I mean here, put yourself like in the mindset of a company like Anthropic or OpenAI or Meta, right? If you are trying to build increasingly advanced AI systems and trying to ensure that they're safe, it's really, really valuable, at least at this point in time, to observe all of the possible failure modes that you can, right? Imagine deploying like ChatGPT for the first time. If you were really, 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 really worried that it would like sometimes swear, or it would sometimes say something kind of rude, or like unsavory in some sense, right? One way you could address most instances of that problem is through like a really simple filtering approach. Right? You could just take some classifier off the shelf for like unsavory content and then just use that to filter or as a signal to like regenerate responses whenever your chatbot said something like that, right? But like OpenAI didn't choose to do this, and neither have other like state-of-the-art AI chat model developers, right? Why didn't they choose to do this? Well, it's because there's a lot of really good stuff to learn from a healthy like adversarial ecosystem when it comes to like red teaming language models because of how much stuff that we can learn from them, right? And emphasis on like today's language models though, because when today's language models fail, like chatbots or something, it can be bad. They can spread misinformation. They can give people bad instructions for things, but like we're gonna be okay, right? Like we're all gonna be fine. If we found that like the worst things that AI would ever do were stuff that like ChatGPT was already doing online, then we could all probably kind of collectively like breathe a sigh of relief, and many of us, myself included, might even go choose to work on other problems in the world, right? But that might not be the case for long. If we're due for another like couple of iterations on the modern dynasty of AI systems, the stakes might get higher and the AI systems might get a lot more intelligent, maybe at an a pace of ever increasing speed, right? So while it's really, really good to like have a lot of failures now, we might not want as many in the future. And that leads me into trying to make the other point I want to make about how like even though it's a really good thing unambiguously that we're seeing all these failures, it's a pretty bad sign, right? Think like in terms of OpenAI. The developers of these state-of-the-art AI systems have gone through a lot of effort in order to prevent so many failures from happening in the first place. And when they do see failures, and they like patch them, right? But then more get found later on. This kind of suggests that problems with AI systems, or at least the current ones we have, and with the current alignment techniques we have, are kind of like a game of whack-a-mole, right? There are lots of problems that just keep popping up. One thing that I think OpenAI responded to a lot of like questions or including some criticism with their release of GPT-4 was that they spent like 6 months red teaming the model and patching a bunch of problems. And we can have full faith that when they did this like good due diligence to red team their own model for months, they found a lot of problems, they learned a lot of lessons, they patched a lot of things, and a bunch of stuff never ever saw the light of day. And that's fantastic. But then why are we still seeing this, right? This is a sign that the alignment problem is pretty hard. So I think observations like this about how despite so much effort, AI systems still recalcitrantly do a bunch of bad things, has led to a lot of sympathy for like people calling for concern about AI risk, right? Including the extinction letter, which probably most people here have like seen or heard about, right? Where a lot of signatories from industry and academia, and I think some from public policy too, got together and kind of declared that they think that mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. So that's kind of crazy that like RLHF got us from GPT-3 to the extinction letter last year, right? And in kind of reflecting on this, I think it's kind of interesting to think like, wait, did things need to go this way? And I think my ultimate answer is maybe, maybe not, but like, let's kind of explore the maybe not side of things. So remember Paul Cristiano from the backflipping hopper slide, right? He last year, so yeah, a little over a year and a half ago, I think, after kind of ChatGPT came out and was a thing, he wrote up some thoughts about developments involving RLHF, and in a blog post, he called it Thoughts on the Impacts of RLHF Research, where he was kind of like thinking about the progress scientifically that he had a large part in kind of like kicking off starting in 2017, right? And in this post, he talks about a lot of the potential like safety benefits of RLHF research and a lot about the safety risks of RLHF research contributing to ever increasing progress in AI capabilities. And he ultimately concludes, perhaps quite presciently, that the lessons that we've been able to learn from RLHF, he thinks are probably going to be net positive, even weighed against the risks that RLHF progress in the state of the art has brought us. But he makes a really interesting comment, I think. He wrote, I think it's hard to productively work on more challenging alignment problems without first implementing basic solutions, in which he's referring to RLHF as a basic solution and something that's going to help us like implement more robust alignment techniques soon. Quick footnote. This slide is a footnote. If you're wondering what Paul is kind of thinking about when he's thinking of like what could be better than RLHF, if you want to read into some of these methods, I would recommend kind of like starting with this paper. I'm not going to talk about it, and it's from 2020, but it's like, and so it's slightly dated, but it's still not a bad reference at all. So if you want to like take a quick photo, if you want to check out this paper, I think it's a great place to start when kind of like, if you want to do a dive into understanding kind of what people think could be more robust alignment approaches, at least in theory, compared to RLHF. But this really isn't like a very controversial take, the one that Paul has. OpenAI kind of agrees here. Last year when they announced their super alignment agenda, I think this was about a year ago, they remarked, our current techniques for aligning AI, such as RLHF, rely on humans' ability to supervise AI, but humans won't be able to reliably supervise AI systems much smarter than us, right? And this kind of reflects like why RLHF is such a like, it can be viewed as a very basic solution for this kind of thing. And this is another moment where I think we have to kind of like take a step back and like think like, wait, where are we and how did we get here again? Because it's pretty interesting that like even the company that has done the most to use RLHF is kind of like openly acknowledging that like it's problematic or it has these fundamental limitations. And one of my co-authors, while we wrote our paper, made an observation that I think was pretty good, or pretty interesting at least, where he called this potentially the consequence of a capabilities capture. He argued that it seems that RLHF's effects on advancing AI capabilities have become much more prominent than its impacts on safety. And I'm not saying this is like a good or bad thing per se, but like consider like this observation in light of what Paul Cristiano thinks about reinforcement learning from human feedback. You know, his best hopes for like RLHF being like net positive to work on come from the lessons that we can learn from it as a basic solution. But that's very, very incongruous with kind of how RLHF is like kind of algorithmically single-handedly driving the state of the art in AI progress, right? Or at least it has been for the past few years, which is pretty interesting. And I'm not about to like hit you with some kind of conclusion right now. I'm not going to say that like OpenAI or Paul has like done something right or wrong because I don't know, and even if I had an opinion, like I probably wouldn't share it anyway. But I do think for sure that we have a lot more lessons to learn. That is one thing that I do feel kind of like quite confident about with reinforcement learning from human feedback. And enter like me actually talking about work that I do. This is like what co-authors and I last year were kind of thinking about principally when we put together this open problems and fundamental limitations paper. Just as RLHF can be algorithmically kind of separated into three key components, so can the challenges with RLHF, right? There are a bunch of challenges with the human feedback step, as you might imagine. Many of them involve human imperfections. There are a bunch of challenges with the reward model step, challenges that machine learning has been familiar with since machine learning has been a thing, because training the reward model is just, fitting a model on data, right? And there are challenges with the policy optimization step, which have been understood pretty well since reinforcement learning was ever a thing, right? And we talk about a lot of challenges in detail, paragraph by paragraph in the paper. And I'm happy to talk more about like anything specifically later on. But if I were to get like into any of these bubbles here, I would kind of be getting in some weeds pretty quickly. So even though our main contribution in the paper was all of this, I'm just spending one slide on it. One high-level observation that I want to like offer though is that challenges kind of cluster into a few distinct types under a certain taxonomy that I find kind of nice, so I'll share it. You can think of some challenges with RLHF as being like technically tractable. These are challenges that might never be perfectly solvable, but we could like arguably hopefully get quite close just using improvements in technical methodology. For example, selecting and training human evaluators is a really hard problem. And doing that well is a big challenge, and arguably like no one has really done a perfect job of this to date. But it is something that we know how to make progress on, right? We just need to be like more careful about how we select people and train people, et cetera, right? So this is something that it's like not conceptually challenging to think about solutions for. Contrast that with fundamental RLHF challenges. These are challenges that you're never going to fully solve within the RLHF framework. And if you were to solve them, you would no longer be using a method that could be called reinforcement learning from human feedback. An example of this type of challenge is that humans can't supervise superhuman models, right? At least not reliably well. This is the kind of thing that OpenAI mentioned a few slides ago when I quoted them. There's actually like a third type of challenge too, which I like to tack on as well, which is just kind of fundamental alignment challenges. These are challenges that are never going to be solved. For example, the classic one, this whole alignment to whom problem. And I think when we think about like RLHF and its impacts on society, which are ever increasing, this problem kind of becomes a lot more poignant, right? We have to think about it a lot more. And unfortunately, there aren't really technical problems to be solved here. They're just kind of choices to be made and consequences to be lived with. And the people living with the consequences aren't always going to be the people making the choices either. We'll get back to more of that later on. But I think thinking about the socio-technical, thinking about RLHF through a socio-technical lens is a really good demonstration of how alignment is an inherently neutral thing, right? It's only valuable in so much as we can trust the people we're aligning the AI to be benevolent and cautious and representative of others. There's another high-level observation that we made about challenges with RLHF, and that is that, and I've been alluding to this a few times earlier, but the components of it are really, really, really algorithmically old, right? What's new about RLHF is the language models that we're applying it to, and the scale of feedback and compute and data that we're doing things with today. But data set creation, supervised fine-tuning, policy optimization, like I've been talking about before, these things are really, really old algorithmic components or kind of concepts in machine learning. And the impressive things that we've been able to achieve with RLHF shouldn't go to fully obscure the fundamental challenges that machine learning has faced since it's been machine learning, right? So one suggestion for a title of the paper that one of my co-authors thought of at one point was questioning, does RLHF mean rehashing lessons from historical failures? And we ultimately didn't end up going with that because it's kind of subversive. But I think it goes to make a good point that so many of the challenges that we're experiencing with today's reinforcement learning from human feedback trained systems are just challenges that you could have predicted in the 90s. So what do we do about some of the problems with RLHF? We don't just try to be cynics. Just like the algorithmic components and the problems can kind of break down by area, so do a lot of the solutions. And again, there are a bunch of details here. There's a bunch in the paper. I'm happy to talk about it any time, except for right about now, because I'd be getting into weeds pretty quickly. I will go into a little detail on addressing some of the challenges with human feedback, though. And this is actually the first time I'm giving a version of this presentation where I'm about to talk about this, because it's relatively new news, right? Less than a month ago, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, that's what my brain tells me or something like that, OpenAI put out a paper called LLM Critics Help Catch LLM Bugs. Has anyone seen this one? It's pretty recent, so you might want to go check it out or Google it on your laptop right now if you'd like. It's not terribly revolutionary conceptually, right? But some really interesting progress was made, right? Basically what they did was they used RLHF to train a chatbot to assist humans in giving good feedback. And then they found that that chatbot could give pretty good feedback in RLAIF situations. And they also found that that chatbot paired with a human could do particularly well. And you could get a lot of the benefits, but not all, of the efficiency and thoroughness of AIs giving feedback and the humanness and the trustability of humans in the loop giving feedback as well. And they ultimately argue that this is there's some really very vulnerable trade-offs that AI-assisted feedback in RLHF can give, right? So this is cool, and it can help to solve a lot of the problems with human attention and human speed giving feedback, right? Which is pretty cool. And it's kind of easy to see this as like a little nice thing, but there's a broader context that I think is important to look at this in. And this is kind of like, I think this paper is a good sign that like maybe the winds are changing a little bit. Maybe there are some signs that like the state of the art with how we train AI systems is going to undergo a significant qualitative shift. And that's all stemming from the fact that what OpenAI did here, while pretty conceptually simple, is the first step toward one proposal for designing, one potentially very powerful proposal for designing potentially very powerful AI systems, right? And that is IDA, or iterative distillation and amplification. Anyone heard of IDA before? Nice, okay, cool. So how does IDA work? I'll still explain it from scratch. So you start out with a human, and you have some sort of process for training an AI system, like RLHF. Think of RLHF as being like arrows here, right? And the very first step, I should have labeled this arrow step 1, but you'll use the human to train a version 0 of the AI system, the initial version. This is the thing that OpenAI just did, right? They used RLHF to train an assistant for doing RLHF, right? Step 2 in iterative distillation and amplification is that you use the human and with assistance from AI v0 to train AI v1, right? And then you can do the same thing again, and so on, where you use increasingly powerful AI assistants to train the next increasingly powerful AI assistant over and over again, right? Conceptually, iterative distillation and amplification has this nice property, whereas if the algorithm that you use to train the AI systems is one that guarantees that an aligned AI system pops out of it, then you get safety and alignment. Well, you get alignment by induction, right? That's really conceptually nice. It's not very practically useful though, because RLHF and other techniques that we might think to use here are not ones that are going to guarantee us aligned AI systems. But who cares about like conceptual ideas, right? Empirics don't care about that. And I think we should probably expect that this type of thing, starting where OpenAI left off and training like an AI v1 and an AI v2, we can expect that this is probably already being worked on. We can expect that this is probably going to result in a significant advancement in the quality and quantity of feedback that can be provided for systems. And this might be one of the things that kind of starts to usher us into a qualitatively different regime of AI services. That's all pretty speculative, but I think it's very timely to start like commenting on this and thinking about this because it's starting to become part of the algorithmic history, I think. If you want to learn more about iterative distillation and amplification, Paul Christiana wrote about it. We keep hearing his name a lot because it just so happens that everything new and amazing happening in the state of the art in AI is stuff that Paul wrote about in the 2010s. Okay, so what about governance, right? And now I'm going to start to stray a bit further from the paper we actually wrote. But we did cover some of this in the paper, right? RLHF trained systems are really advanced and really potentially societally impactful, right? So it's not hard to argue that we might want to think about governing them effectively. Inside the paper, we talk about how there is some really useful information involving the human feedback process, the reward model, the policy, and the systemic safety measures that could be very, very valuable for helping auditors like understand what's kind of gone on with an AI system that's been trained with RLHF as a way of more incisively looking for problems. We think, and we talk about this in the paper, there could be some really nice advantages of having norms or expectations or requirements in which companies using RLHF disclose certain details here. One nice thing about more disclosure of details behind RLHF trained systems is that it can help auditors like catch more problems. That's the obvious one. But it also encourages better incentives, right? If a developer is expected to explain and justify the algorithmic choices that they made when training their system, then they have a better incentive to make better algorithmic choices in the first place. And also, more transparency about what exactly is going on can kind of help society just track RLHF's progress and challenges in general, which is obviously pretty valuable when we're trying to think about like meaningful policy oversight. I don't have too much more to argue about like prima facie about how it could be really useful to have more disclosure about what's going into our RLHF systems. I just want to talk about an empirical example, which I think is like great case in point. Do any of you've probably heard about like the Bing chat or the Sydney debacle that kind of happened not too long after ChatGPT became a thing. So OpenAI, with its partnerships with Microsoft, gave Microsoft some kind of model, and they wove this into Bing somehow, some way, and it resulted in the most like alarmingly terrible alignment failures that we've observed to date. Right? So don't read all this, it's too much, but you'll find different articles and stuff that this is discussed in. But there are a lot of examples in which Bing Chat like openly just kind of like threatened users. And there's this really one interesting one in which it like dug up specific information about one user just in order to like threaten him in a really like aggressive way. And it's kind of funny because it's just Bing Chat and it can't hurt you. But if this kind of thing happened later on in the future where the stakes were higher, the AI system had more power and it was smarter, then we might kind of start needing to worry. And it's really nice from the perspective of us still being in the LLM regime or the chatbot regime that like we have this interesting case study to learn from. But it's really unfortunate that we don't know most of the details behind it. Microsoft has not, to my knowledge, ever kind of released some type of public report explaining the algorithmic choices and the institutional choices that led to deploying this AI system. And I think we can all agree, as people who like think about AI safety, that it would be really, really nice to have some kind of report about this. It would be really, really nice to have some more transparency about what led to the most alarming alignment failure to date. But we don't, because it's not in Microsoft's PR incentives. I'm going to talk more about PR incentives too, pretty soon as well. So put a pin in that. On the theme of auditors having more access, this is something that I've been increasingly interested in recently, and following the Open Problems and Fundamental Limitations with RLHF paper, a bunch of other co-authors and I wrote a paper called Black Box Access is Insufficient for Rigorous AI Audits. And this paper itself kind of like represents some of my matured thinking in this direction. I'm just going to put it up for fun. You can check it out if you want, but I'm not going to talk too much more about it. Instead, I'm going to talk more about some other last few governance-y things related to RLHF. One of these is a really generic point, but one that I'm just going to make anyway because I think it's important. And I think this point, like it's hard to make this point too much. But RLHF is a really powerful algorithm that trains really powerful systems, which gives a lot of power to people and corporations that control them. And that has the potential for like a lot of money and power to move around in society. And when money and power moves around in society, sometimes good things happen and sometimes bad things happen, right? Here's just one estimate. You can find many from McKinsey Digital about how generative AI could add many trillions of dollars annually in GDP. Which is kind of going to be controlled by the technocrats who control these systems. And that's something that society should be like aware of and should act appropriately in the face of. But maybe more interestingly, I have one other kind of angle on like AI governance. And that is one specifically involving like social justice, right? And in particular, I want to focus on some of the justice concerns that happen not after you deploy the system, but just before you deploy the system, because some of these are particularly like interesting and interesting to study. So in early 2023, when ChatGPT was still kind of new, a Times news article dropped, which was based on some investigative journalism, which found that OpenAI was using a large cohort of Kenyan knowledge workers who were paid less than $2 USD per hour to make ChatGPT less toxic, right? And like none of this is too surprising, right? If you're like OpenAI, you have a lot of incentive to like get pretty cheap labor because you want to use a lot of human feedback to get a lot of data to train really like smart models, right? And the reaction to this article was kind of like what you'd expect. People were like, what's the conversion rate between USD and Kenyan currency? What's going on? This kind of like smells bad. What's up here? Is this a social justice problem? It pretty much was. Some more information came out in, I think, July of last year. And this came from Wall Street Journal's Karen Howe, where a kind of a more detailed report involving what had happened kind of came out. So there is an article/transcript of a podcast online called The Hidden Workforce That Helped Filter Violence and Abuse Out of ChatGPT, which gave a lot more detail about what exactly was kind of going on here. The first question that it answered was like, why OpenAI did this specifically. The transcript quotes, Kenya is a low-income country and it has a very high unemployment rate. Wages are really low, which is very attractive to tech companies that are trying to increase their profit margins. And it's also a highly educated workforce that speaks English because of colonization, and there's good Wi-Fi infrastructure. Beyond this, the podcast transcript goes on to quote or discuss a lot of interviews and quotes from participants in this knowledge cohort, like Kenyans who are doing this knowledge work. And there was not a bunch, like some of them had some not good things to say about their experiences, right? In a previous version of this presentation, when I was drafting it, I had a lot of like quotes from the transcript, and I redacted some things just to make sure it was definitely okay to show in front of everyone. It got way too messy and too complicated. So I'm just gonna talk about this transcript a little bit, and if you want, you can go look it up. It's not gonna like horrify you and scar you for life, but I just wanted you to do that at your discretion, I don't want to show it on the slide, right? So this transcript talks about, or quotes and talks about interviews and gives quotes from these knowledge workers because of involving some very bad experiences in moderating toxic content and like very bad content, right? Imagine your OpenAI really quick. Right? If you want to make sure that your AI system, like ChatGPT, is not going to output horrible things, you need to make sure that the reward model in RLHF knows that horrible text is horrible text. And in order for the reward model to know that horrible text is horrible text, you need examples of horrible text in order to label them as horrible so the reward model can learn that they're horrible, right? You follow me? So it makes a lot of sense. Like, it's obvious that if you're OpenAI, you kind of need a lot of examples of horrible text, and you need labels for them, right? It just so happened that this cohort of Kenyan knowledge workers were tasked with doing a lot of this labeling of very terrible text. And lots of it included very graphical textual depictions of sexual violence, right? And put yourself in the position of like a knowledge worker here who sees this stuff and reads this stuff and labels and annotates this stuff day in and day out, right? You would probably, after like reading text over and over again that's like as bad as you would care to imagine, you might feel kind of upset or distressed. And after a long time, you can imagine this could be like kind of like psychologically wear you down and make you feel pretty bad, right? This is what some of these Kenyan knowledge workers like are quoted to have experienced, right? This podcast transcript talks about how some of them had difficulty sleeping, had difficulty feeling like safe and happy on a day-to-day basis, had difficulties like having positive relationships with family members, right? Just pretty harmful stuff. And some of them talked in the transcript about how they didn't know what they were getting into. They didn't feel like they were sufficiently informed at the get-go. And afterward, they confidently regret their participation in this cohort because it wasn't worth the less than $2 USD per hour that they were paid. So, backing up, we have this instance in which OpenAI, which is a very wealthy and very powerful company, had some dirty work to do. And in order to do this dirty work, they outsourced it overseas to people who were poor and arguably underpaid them while exposing them to very damaging content that was predictably psychologically distressing, and it had harmful effects on these people, up to the point of making at least some of them confidently regret their decision to participate in this cohort. So I think this is a good example. Well, like OpenAI, it's not a monolith, but I do think this is a good example of like some instances in which, things can kind of get out of hand, right? So OpenAI, like Anthropic falls into this category too, are these like very ambitious companies who have the goal of making AI benefit humanity as much as possible. At least this is their stated goal. And I think I believe them in this, and we all hope that they're successful. But in instances like this, in which their mouth seems to be doing something a little bit different than their hands, or the goals that they profess don't quite seem to be exactly what they're pursuing, I think this is a great example of how we need more transparency, and we might need some more accountability when it comes to this kind of stuff, right? OpenAI still does a lot of work with Kenyan knowledge workers. There was some more investigative journalism work by Karen Howe pretty recently about how their employment is very unstable, and this can be kind of like financially harmful. And I think OpenAI was pretty embarrassed about all this last year, but I have no reason to believe that they've kind of fixed everything here. Nor have they released some kind of explanation or apology, or nor have they detailed some of the institutional choices that led to this happening, right? And I don't expect them to, because again, it's something that's not in their PR incentives. And when PR incentives conflict with public good and the benefit of humanity, I think this is a great instance in which we might need some more transparency. So I want to wrap up before questions with one more slide. And overall, I think that as more happens, things get more interesting with RLHF, and I actually kind of feel less and less confident about a lot of things with it. But I want to wrap up on a few things that I do feel pretty confident about, involving RLHF and the history of it, right? One is that it was never intended, at least not by Paul, as the solution to AI alignment, right? And we know conceptually in theory that RLHF is not, and in practice, that RLHF is not going to solve all of our problems, right? Nonetheless, it's the state of the art for AI alignment anyway, right? And to the extent that this is due to a capabilities capture, it's probably not the last capabilities capture that we will ever see. RLHF's failures have taught us a lot, but we still have a lot more to learn from them. And hopefully, we can keep learning a lot of things very quickly before a new qualitative development in the modern regime of advanced AI services. And finally, we can't afford to make so many mistakes as the AI systems get smarter and the stakes get higher, right? Remember how so much effort and so much time was put into trying to make sure that modern LLMs trained with RLHF went well, and we can assume that so many problems were solved, but that doesn't make it any better to observe the ones that we did, and we continue to over and over again, right? So I kind of want to conclude with a certain echo of the cliche that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I hope that this talk has done an okay job of kind of getting some of you all thinking about not just what RLHF is as this technical tool or algorithm, but what RLHF is as part of a broader algorithmic story, and what lessons from historical failures we might try to learn from instead of repeating. And that's all, and I'm really happy for questions. Yeah.
Let's start here.
Okay, cool.
Thank you very much for this wonderful lecture. I was wondering, the failure modes you just mentioned, from the human perspective, that workers get basically exploited in Kenya. I made one of the tests and asked ChatGPT if it knows about this, and indeed it does. And I was wondering, is there a chance of introducing an intrinsic problem there, in the sense of that the model learns that it can use whatever method it wants as long as it serves some higher goal, in this sense, to align it with human preferences?
So I think what you're reminding me of here is so it's a pretty good thing that I haven't checked this, that ChatGPT kind of knows about news reporting on problems with OpenAI's or perceived, at least perceived problems with OpenAI's labor and workforces behind ChatGPT. I think that's good, although that's a pretty low bar, because if it didn't know about it, that would just be very suspicious, right? But when thinking about like, you know, it seems nice that ChatGPT isn't like strategically doing any kind of like censorship or anything like that. If it were, I think we'd kind of be more in like misaligned Bing chat territory. If we were observing that from ChatGPT, I'd be really interested in that. For the same reason, I'm just really interested in figuring out what was going on behind all of this. I don't think I have too many other comments, but I'm just like glad that like at least ChatGPT knows.
Right.
Thanks.
Again, thanks for the awesome talk. About human alignment, obviously, like you need a human to align to it. And interesting, you mentioned that like the feedback currently it mostly needs the bad cases, the failure cases. The worse the case, the important is to incorporate it. I'm wondering about the opposite of the spectrum, like learning from demonstration, from good people behavior. I don't think if you have some pointers how to incorporate like good people behavior.
Yeah. And we talk about these themes a bit in the paper. So I'm just going to actually like navigate to one of my first slides here, right? So here. So with how we describe RLHF up front, like notice how this slide here is like really, really vague. Because here I just say human feedback, and earlier I described human feedback as being metadata, right? The most vague and general possible thing I could say. Because truly, like there are ways to incorporate lots of like modalities of feedback into RLHF or similar algorithms, right? It's really common to use binary preferences. We know this. It's really cheap, which is kind of nice. But also scalar feedback can be used. Like humans can give scalar ratings, like I rate that like a 10, or they can do slider bars. Other types of feedback like demonstrations, you can think of demonstrations as feedback, or corrections to demonstrations as feedback. There's also like fine-grained feedback where you like go to a paragraph and you'll like highlight specific things and give each each sentence in the paragraph maybe a specific annotation. There's also like vector feedback where you can give feedback for like different aspects of something being good or bad, right? I think this is called like multi-goal feedback sometimes. But there's just a lot of stuff, right? There's a lot of stuff that can happen and a lot of like ways that humans can be involved here. And honestly, I assume that like in the state of the art with like modern AI systems, like whatever LLM is like powering the latest version of ChatGPT, I assume that there's a lot of stuff going into it. It's probably the result of multiple types of training processes, potentially involving different modalities of feedback. In summary, I think like there's just a lot of really rich stuff that can happen here. And we can think of it all under this RLHF umbrella because there's a lot of like common stuff and common challenges and problems that these different types of methods face. But there are some still really important differences and advantages and disadvantages of different methods. You also have to think about like what's going on with humans and interfaces with humans when you evaluate the whole system, right? There was one really cool paper, I think it was like called Peering Through Preferences. It was by like, I think University of Southern California, or maybe UCSD lab, but they showed that when you used RLHF to optimize language models, and you trained them with scalar versus binary preference feedback, and then you evaluated them with scalar versus binary preference evaluations, guess which method preferred which, right? So there's a lot to think about here.
Thanks for the amazing talk. I want to ask about one thing where I think you said something that contradicts each other, and I would like to have your opinion about it. And the one thing was that you said that one of the basic problems of reinforcement learning human feedback is that how should a less intelligent system supervise a more intelligent system? But on the other hand, for IDA, we have this thing of like a less intelligent system training a more intelligent system. Does this contradict you? Is this a contradiction for you or not?
Yeah.
What's the difference here? For me, it's like quite similar things.
So I'm really glad you asked that question, and I'm really excited to like go back here because I think it kind of merits more explanation. And I'll give my answer, and I hope my answer is like somewhat clarifying and somewhat satisfying, although it might not be 100%, right? So there is this fundamental problem of kind of like weaker systems trying to supervise stronger ones. Lots of people are thinking about like weak to strong generalization lately. I'm not sure if that research agenda is going to go anywhere, but like for what it's worth, people are thinking about it, and there are some like challenges with it for sure. In iterative distillation and amplification, one thing that kind of makes it a little bit different from just like a simple attempt at like weak to strong generalization is that aside from the V0 of the system, every subsequent system has two arrows going to it, right? And these two arrows are like collaboration. The fact that AIV1 has two arrows pointing into it is, in this diagram as I constructed it, meant to reflect that the human is collaborating with AIV0. So it might be the case that the human is most of the time less intelligent than what AIV1 comes out to be. And AIV0 is generally less intelligent than AIV1 too. But the combination of those two, in addition to like how the quantity of feedback that they're able to provide, that's the hope for this kind of thing being able to, in a controlled way, produce ever increasingly more intelligent systems, right? That's the conceptual argument for it. But like obviously, like that's not the empirical challenge. The empirical challenge is like one, seeing if this thing actually kind of works, going beyond step one, like OpenAI has, and two, taking a step back and being like, hey, wait, is this actually useful for safety? Or like net beneficial for safety, or like the world as opposed to like exacerbating risks through capabilities progress? That's another challenge there. Is that hopefully relatively satisfying? Cool. I'm also going to try to speed up with questions because I think there are a good number of hands. So I think we have like 20 more minutes or 15. But
yeah, I was wondering if there's any way of knowing beforehand if an alignment technique will be captured for capabilities. If there's like any heuristic to sort it out if it will be used for capabilities or not.
Yeah, I think my best answer to this question is that like, we have this thing we care about, and it's AI safety, right? Or let's posit that we care about this AI safety thing, right? And things that are useful for AI safety, we can consider to be in like one category here. AI alignment and AI capabilities, because alignment is just a capability, is like kind of a Venn diagram here, right? There's some really nice things about alignment, because if you're worried about systems causing harm because they did something that their developers did not intend them to do, then you have a safety problem, right? And lots of alignment work is worth doing because it's net beneficial for safety, because it's going to help us avoid like unintended failures when a system does something that its developers did not want it to do. But like alignment is a double-edged sword. Alignment just means like making the AI system like aligned or work as intended according to its developers. So there's this other challenge here too, right? Like an alignment just is a type of capability, or an alignment method is always a capabilities method. And in worlds, or when it comes to challenges in which we're worried a lot about like negligence and misuse, or like systemic effects involving lots of like money and power sometimes, alignment can actively be harmful here, right? So I think my best attempt at answering this question, which I think is like a really important question, which strikes at the heart of like everything that all of us probably do, my best attempt at answering this is to point out that like alignment is not the same thing as safety. And it's sometimes a very like insidious thing that our community does by conflating the two. And that like alignment is inherently neutral and is a double-edged sword.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Just on the point of regulation, so we don't know what data always these models are being trained on, but we see a lot of companies seem to be scraping the internet and profiting off of private content. So should the point of regulation be not allowing these models to be built unless they purchase the right to all the content? Otherwise, it seems like they're trying to make sure a criminal uses their wealth not in dangerous ways as opposed to an environment to have a wealth in the first place.
Yeah, So I think from the perspective of the scope of this talk, or from the perspective of the scope of my work on reinforcement learning from human feedback, which is a very limited perspective, I think my answer to this question would be something like, you know, in this context, like the purpose of regulation is to do, which is it? These three things, right? But you're asking a much broader question, and I'll answer this as like myself, not as like a certain like project instance of myself, right? Because you bring up this point about like how like regulation can provide a potentially useful like lever on just kind of controlling what AI systems go out into the world anyway, right? Which is not something that is exactly, or at least not explicitly covered under these 3 bullet points. And to that point, I think like, yeah. And anyone who believes in AI governance should also just kind of believe in like the potential of this thing to happen too, right? If governance is not to be perfunctory, there needs to be some conditions in which, you know, some type of system which does not meet some type of specs, or, you know, which has not undergone enough diligence or evaluations or something, just can't be deployed, right? And that from that perspective, I'm very in favor of this kind of thing. You know, this is kind of analogous to some of the bullet points on this slide, but like, you know, there are some different theories of impacts for like AI governance, and some of those theories of impact involve just like, you know, the AI governance helping us solve the helping us prevent bad solutions to the technical problem by finding instances of them. But there are other theories for like positive influence of AI governance that just involve like, you know, the additional oversight and bureaucracy making, providing a stabilizing effect and adding checks and balances to the power of AI systems and users and developers. And I think, you know, and the same thing happens in other industries as well. Like, this is a nice thing about policy.
Hi there. Great talk and clear communication. Thanks a lot for that. I'm not super familiar with RLHF and the intricacies of it, but I'm wondering whether you can comment on some of the advantages or disadvantages of doing online or offline RLHF. It seems to me that often it's offline. You get all of the labels from annotators, and then you train a reward model. And I'm wondering, could there be a advantage of actually having it be a bit more iterative? You start already changing the model's weights while you're giving feedback.
Yeah, we talk about this a little bit in the paper. I'm gonna forget all of the points that we made about it, but there are important algorithmic differences when there is a continuous like online loop versus when there is a loop that goes, you know, cycles discretely, right? And maybe the most pedagogic difference, and the one that comes to my mind, and the one that I know I can explain clearly right now, is that imagine you're doing things offline, right? And you're doing like this RLHF thing where you're training the policy, you stop, then you gather more data, you stop, you update the reward model, you stop, and you continue the cycle, right? Well, what's going to happen here? So you have your reward model, which is trained on a distribution of examples that the policy just produced at its last checkpoint, right? So your reward model is going to fit that distribution because it's a machine learning model, and that's what machine learning models do. And then you're going to update the policy using that reward model, and then what's the policy going to do? It's going to change. It's going to visit different state. It's going to have a different state visitation distribution than before, by necessity, because that's the definition of like updating a policy, right? So this policy is going to tend to like go off to the reward model's distribution and probably like, you know, do reward hacking, right? And then, you know, we just got to like go try to like, if we're in the offline setting, we got to go try to like chase that cycle again and update things and hope they converge. But there are no theoretical guarantees that something like this is going to converge. So that's a problem. It's much easier to explain how that's a problem conceptually, though, than to quantify how much of a problem it is in practice, because stuff like this is expensive and it's really hard to justify sometimes, like doing whole training runs just to look at problems like this. So this counts as like one of these kind of open questions and like what's going on when we're doing RLHF with the models that we're doing it with.
Thanks a lot.
Thank come from the limitations of the core components that compose it?
I would say almost all. Sorry, if we're just thinking from a technical standpoint. If we're thinking from a governance standpoint, then like, arguably all of the important challenges are emergent. But if we're thinking from a technical challenge, there's this one thing that I didn't go into in depth on, involving how there are some problems that happen when you jointly optimize a reward model in a policy, right? Which happen to be related to what I just described, right, in the last question. So this is one specific thing that is like definitely emergent and not like just something that supervenes on the reward model optimization process or just the policy optimization process. It's something that emerges from the interaction between these two things in the broader like composite algorithm, right? But other than this, and strictly from a technical perspective, most of the problems with RLHF, as I think they're best characterized, are ones that are just like involving one of the three algorithmic components.
So you characterize RLHF as being like really important for progress in the last few years. Indeed, you said like it's the main driver of capabilities in the last few years, and that sort of directly led to this extinction letter and so on. Like, it seems plausible to me that this is just not the case. Like, at first, a bunch of the early models that people thought were using RLHF actually weren't, or were using a very simple version of like supervised fine tuning, like GPT 3.5 and so on. And even before that, like if you take the Minerva model that was solving math problems the summer before ChatGPT, this is like, you know, a big capabilities jump on that benchmark, seemed quite striking, had nothing to do with RLHF. And indeed, a lot of the change in public perception, like related to this extinction letter and so on, seems more to do with just like, there was a moment of public awareness about ChatGPT, which maybe has more to do with just like a nice simple UX and stuff than it had to do with whatever particular algorithms they were using. And so it seems like the importance of RLHF it seems plausible that it's not such a centrally important thing as you make it out to be for capabilities. And relatedly, a bunch of these problems you point out seem like they're like hallucinations or privacy issues and things like that. Like these arise from the pre-training process of training this next token predictor. And RLHF doesn't necessarily mitigate them, but there were problems that had to do with the rest of the process, and arguably are like capabilities failures in some cases. So yeah, what do you make of this kind of like response?
Yeah, I think this is like interesting and useful framing to think about, and it is framing, so I'll try to spend like an appropriate amount of time on it. But I think what you're saying is pretty cool and pretty interesting and pretty useful. Like I'm happy, I'm really glad that you're thinking about things this way. I think my defense here is that like, you know, I agree with your internal link that you pointed out to like impact here, like the public awareness, you know, that came after ChatGPT, and definitely this probably involved the UX a lot. But I mean, it also involved like 3.5 and 4, and you know, I guess the public to date like isn't fully familiar with what exactly went into 3.5 and 4, but we do know, we can suspect that like it's probably RLHF as depicted here, or a mixture of multiple things involving some of the things at the bottom, which I said I was going to use RLHF to refer to as like an intentional kind of abuse of terminology here. But like I think to your point, I really like the way of being more critical or more detail oriented with kind of like trying to like map things out. And I think you're pointing out some like ways that I arguably simplified things, and I don't think I would come up and say that like, you know, I couldn't have had more detail here. But I hope that this can be one instance in which like, you know, all models are wrong, but some models are useful. And this story that I'm trying to tell, I'm hoping it's kind of a useful model. and I don't want to miss the forest for the trees either. But like I don't want to concede too many of like the key characterizations I had. Like yes, the UX was involved, for example, but like RLHF was definitely like kind of a key driver here, I guess. I don't know. Happy to talk more.
This is maybe just, I'm not sure if better like this like figure on which way the models actually trained, and sometimes people like when they hear like RLHF, they believe it's kind of, I don't know, like trained on the preferences of the Kenyan workers. So this is not the case. The laborers get a set of rules or like kind of objectives like similarly to the constitutional AI, and the laborers are kind of actually aligning the model to like the corporate preferences, to what someone kind of like created as yeah, like label this answer as if better if it's, I don't know, not like I don't know, like I think like there are examples where it seems very clear that to what the model is like kind of pushed to is not necessarily in what the individual humans would endorse. It's probably also not what like humanity would endorse. For example, the models are like kind of like trying to like lie or like mislead humans about their like internal states and so on. So it's maybe more proper name for the actual implementation could be like reinforcement learning from like corporate preferences.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
So one really interesting thing, if you go to the Cristiano paper, right? The Cristiano paper, in the text of the paper, talked about, like kind of formalized what they were trying to do here. And they kind of offered a formulation of this RLHF process that has kind of become the one that people have run with and the one that people have kind of like repeated and used because it's very technically clean and simple and nice, right? And in this formulation of the problem setup, there is a human named H, just one human, who is assumed to be singular and have a coherent, stable set of like goals and preferences that persist over time. This isn't the case. Nothing about that's realistic. There are many humans. These humans have sometimes important disagreements that are not adequately modeled as noise, statistical noise. And humans have evolving preferences that change over time, right? Another challenge is that humans don't even like see the whole state. They sometimes have lapses in attention and aren't as eminently detail-oriented as we would always like to be. And this kind of gap between the problem that we try to solve with RLHF and the problem that we actually would need to solve the socio-technical problem that we actually need to solve is a really like good one where there's a lot of like good work making good critiques, and it's a good example of like a glaring potential for Goodhart's law as well. So I like that point. It's not really like reinforcement learning from human feedback that the companies are doing. It's reinforcement learning from data annotator cohort feedback, which is pretty hard to model in a very clean way.
I was wondering if there are canonical ways to ensure you don't nerf the model with reinforcement learning. Classical example being you don't want the AI to advise people to cook poison, but you want the AI to advise people to cook stuff. How to make sure it doesn't generalize from the one to the other?
Yeah. So I think you're one challenge with this type of stuff in general. This is much broader than just the context of like RLHF. Is that like sometimes we want models to generalize in ways that are very useful, and sometimes we want models to not generalize in ways that are not useful. There's no, from an algorithm's point of view, there's no difference between useful generalization and harmful misgeneralization, right? And this is kind of a very fundamental ML problem, and as you might imagine, as a fundamental ML problem, it is a huge problem with RLHF, right? And the solution, is, better priors and/or more data. And better priors probably just mean more data anyway, right? So, is that all I have to say on this? Possibly, unless I'm missing the point of your question. Yeah. Yeah, it's more data. I hate to like get a very general important question and just answer more data, but that's kind of my thought at the moment. Yeah.
Just to elaborate a bit more, to like build on the last question that I had. Does reinforcement learning from human feedback actually like remove a lot of capabilities, like even outside of just like telling it not to do things that you're unsafe? Does it significantly reduce like the normal capabilities of the model just because you're like using them very
so anyone who wants a bunch of stuff related to this question should email me. I will send you a paragraph with a bunch of hyperlinks in it. And this question that you're asking is more related to my non-RLHF work than my RLHF work. And I really love this question. In summary, there's like a bunch of evidence about like what happens when we fine-tune AI systems from a bunch of different subfields, like continual learning and adversarial attacks and mechanistic interpretability and fine-tuning, et cetera. That's kind of like all converging on the understanding that when we fine-tune models to not exhibit bad capabilities that they could have exhibited before from like pre-training, we're not really deeply removing those capabilities most of the time. We're kind of doing something that could more easily be described as behaviorally suppressing those capabilities. And there's a lot of evidence that like bad unwanted capabilities that safety fine-tuning tried to remove can resurface from like fine-tuning or other post-deployment modifications or anomalies or attacks, right? And this is a big problem with like how we fine-tune AI systems with like RLHF and related and like supervised fine-tuning, right? And there is kind of there are a few emerging research agendas, plus just mech-interp being mech-interp, that are all kind of like trying to address this problem of like unwanted capabilities and like deeply removing them instead of like behaviorally suppressing them. And this is a good example of a challenge that RLHF, like vanilla RLHF, is not well equipped to solve empirically.